Hi, welcome. Oh, got it. Okay, the recording thing. Okay, I'm Helen Klein, and I am the appropriate introducer, so to speak, of our two presenters today. This course is officially titled Rosebud Reservation, Learning about the Lakota Culture During Hope May Term Experiences. And our presenters are Susan Cherup and Tony Donk. Susan has been doing these trips for 29 years and was hoping for 30 when COVID hit and got kind of kiboshed. And I'm not sure what her plans are for the next time around, but I know she wants to hit that number 30. She started out her career as a public school educator, teaching elementary school, special education, adult education, and migrant education. She came to Hope subsequently and taught there for 46 years and started the special education program there. She has her BA from Hope, an MA from Western Michigan University, and holds endorsements in emotional impairments and learning disabilities. So that's Susan. Tony, he also was a public school educator for 17 some years and then subsequently has taught at Hope for 35 years, taught education. How do you add those numbers up, Tony, and how young are you?
I'm just amazingly youthful looking.
There
was some overlap. That was the
issue. So he's been accompanying Susan for not all 29 years, but a great number of them. His education, he has a BA in English and education, which Tony, by the way, that's exactly what my BA was in. An MSW from Western Michigan University and a PhD from Michigan State. And he has focused much of his career on literacy education. He has the unique distinction of being a neighbor of mine that I didn't know before COVID. So because he and his wife walked their dogs and my dog Twig fell in love with their dog Otis, we ended up meeting last winter many times in my driveway, just chit-chatting and freezing to death. And that's how I found out about the Rosebud thing that you guys are doing and suggested that we might do a HASP class. So that's kind of the backstory. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Susan and Tony.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us today. Obviously, we would love to actually all be in a room together and do a little more interactive kinds of things, but it is what it is. So we'll make this work as we can.
But Tony, should we tell him there will be a test at the end of this?
Yes.
Because this is a class, so be prepared.
Yes. So Kim, if you can go to the next slide for me, that'd be great. There we go. So we want to do just start out by talking a little bit about what we hope to accomplish during this particular presentation. And obviously, we want to talk about the Lakota Sioux Indians and try to give you as much background about the culture as we understand it. If you look at the second point, this one is really important to us. We're going to really be talking about our perceptions of life on the reservation, as well as all the things that seem to influence it. But emphasis on our perception. One of the things that Susan and I have talked about a lot is it's difficult being us and trying to present in an accurate way of a culture that we aren't part of. We are not Indigenous people. We've spent lots of time on the Rosebud Reservation, especially Susan. Excuse me, but we're telling this through the eyes of, I'm a white male, Susan's a white female. Even our worldviews are not identical sometimes in the way that we see things. So what would be wonderful is if we had Leland Little Dog, who you'll meet later in this presentation, if he were here and he could tell you the story of Rosebud, but that's not possible at this point. So we're gonna do it as best we can, but no, it's coming from our worldview, our perceptions, and that may make some of the things, our perceptions, a bit inaccurate.
Mm-hmm.
And then we want to tell you about this May term that Susan started almost 30 years ago. And hopefully this spring. We're moving forward, keeping our fingers crossed pandemic wise, but hoping to get that 30th year in this spring.
It may be 35.
Oh,
Who
God.
knows?
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay, Kim, you can move to the next screen. This is you.
Oh, that you-
Oh, no, sorry. A little coordination problem. So we wanted to give you just some bigger picture of the tribal nations in the US at this point. And right now in the US, there are 326 federally recognized reservations, but there are 574 federally recognized tribes. So obviously that's not a fit. You can't have 326 reservations and 574 tribes. What uniquely happens is that some of the reservations actually house more than one tribe. They share the land. So that takes care of part of that. And then there are reservations in the US currently that don't have, or I'm sorry, there are tribal nations that simply don't have reservation land. They don't have land at all. They communicate in other ways.
Next. Okay, could I just ask him, there's some black lines that we're seeing. Is there any way to get the black triangles, and maybe it's just Tony, my screen off?
There we go.
Ooh, wonderful. Okay, so here's the state of South Dakota. And the dialects for the Sioux Nation, if you look at the top left is the Nakota. They were differentiated by the dialect of the language. So the Nakota were in the northwestern part of South Dakota and also Montana. Then the Lakota are in the Central Plains, and that's the group we're going to be talking about today. And then the Dakota were in the southeastern part of South Dakota, also Minnesota. So I only bring this up. There are 3 dialects that are all part of the Sioux tribe. Then if you look at the bottom of this map, and I'll begin this by saying, usually if we're talking about Holland, Michigan, out in South Dakota, or raise our hand and say right here. So when you look at the state of South Dakota, you can put your hand this way, and it's the southernmost part. If you see, and I can't move this around, which is a little frustrating, but right above South Dakota, you'll see Rosebud. That is the reservation where we go. Then if you go to the left, in yellow is Pine Ridge Reservation. And then if you notice right in the middle, there is what we call non-Indian land. So there are 2 reservations and a non-reservation right in the middle. And that's just kind of interesting. So here's South Dakota. Here is where we go. And if you go to the next one, okay, so I talked about the dialects, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, and we'll concentrate on the Lakota. And there are 7 tribes in the Sioux group. So I talked about Pine Ridge, Ogallala, a famous person from there was Crazy Horse, and then Rosebud that we go through, which is the Sichangu tribe. And Spotted Tail was an important chief there. And the word Sioux, and I guess maybe this is a good time to say, you may have heard or read different things about the Sioux that we might share today, but that is because of the oral tradition. So there are many stories that are about certain things, even the creation story. First time we heard it, oh, this is it. But then there was another creation story. So I'm only prefacing that because with an oral tradition, it's difficult to get sometimes the same answer about things.
Mhm.
Well, with the word Sioux, a French word meaning snake, where did this really come from? Some other tribes have been said to have given it to this group. So we don't really know. The thing we know is it's not real popular right now by the people of the Rosebud.
I think too that just to add on to what Susan was saying, when this name Sioux was given to them, it was meant to be a derogatory term, and it's a part of a much longer term. So one of the things that we've always wondered when we're on the res is, I sort of grew up in the age of, watching cowboys and Indians on television and all of the mischaracterizations of both of those groups, but natives in particular. So one of the things that we've tried to wrap our head around even is what's your preferred term? What do you wish to be called? And that's been a really difficult thing to nail down. So, some people will say Sioux. It's more common there for people to say Lakota as opposed to Sioux, because the Lakota part doesn't have that same negative connotation. But even true in a larger sense, do you call Indigenous people natives? Do you call them Native Americans? Do you call them Indians? And we've asked, sometimes those are really delicate questions to ask. But we do have a connection with a younger Native teacher, and he was a little more approachable with that sort of a question. And he really talked more about groups preferring to be called by their tribal names as opposed to using some of those other terms. But he said Native and Indigenous are also acceptable terms to use as well.
Thank you. Okay, next. Okay, here are the counties, and there are 5 counties. And if you'll notice in the lower left is Todd County. And Rosebud Indian Reservation encompasses is all in Todd County. But you can see there are many other small communities. So if you go to the next slide, and I'm so sorry we can't navigate this ourselves, and poor Kim has to do it. Okay, it's interesting with the communities on Todd County, and I just put a few of these here with their names. Antelope, because there's great respect for animals. Spring Creek Community, because there's great respect for nature. Parmalee, just hold that in your mind because I'm going to talk about Parmalee on the next slide. The community of Rosebud is really the headquarters of the tribe, and the community of Rosebud is on Rosebud Reservation, which sometimes can be a little confusing. Then there's Two Strikes, named after an Indian chief. Then there's an Upper Cut Meat community. And this is real interesting because there's a Cut Meat Creek. And above that creek is Upper Cut Meat community. And below that is Lower Creek. And that's where buffalo and cattle were slaughtered. And then that meat was taken to the agency on Rosebud. And then the Indian people will go to the agency and pick this up. But I just think they're just interesting stories behind the names. And also, I looked up the populations, and Tony said, we can't use these, Susan, because they're from 2008. But I couldn't find anything more recent. But I can tell you, Upper Cut Meat probably still only has 11 families. And Antelope probably has 300 people. So we're talking about real small communities. In fact, you could drive by Grass Mountain And Leland Little Dog would say there's a community and there are 2 houses there. So it's just
Mhm.
totally different and very interesting.
Mhm.
Next one. Okay, I said I wanted to tell you a little about Parmalee. Here is a picture of the neighborhood of Parmalee, and you can see it's a very, very poor and disadvantaged area. But on the top right, you can see a beautiful star quilt that is made in that community. They have set up a business, and Indian women, I don't think I've seen a man there
There was
working.
one at the
One
other,
man?
yeah. Mhm.
Okay, and Indian people will work and make these quilts and then sell them. And the idea is to help people earn some money so they can have a few more things that they would like to. The picture below that are the Hope College senior basketball players who we gave them a star quilt, because with these star quilts, you honor people and you say nice things about them and you wrap them in a quilt. At graduation, instead of getting gifts, the graduates will honor a teacher or an aunt or a grandparent and wrap them in a quilt and say nice things about them. So when you look at the sadness and poverty, but there's some beautiful things coming out there, which is really good. And this business has probably been there, what, 5 years now,
Mhm.
which is pretty good.
Mhm.
Next. Okay. Susan, Tony, and probably Dave Zort, who first started this program with me, said we have witnessed people who demonstrate resilience in the face of adversity. That is very clear. And this statue was to honor the Lakota people. And it is situated on the banks of the Mississippi River. That's just behind Dignity, an indigenous woman. And you can see she's wrapped in a quilt. It's near Chamberlain, South Dakota. And she's receiving a star quilt. So this statue is to really honor the Lakota people.
Mhm. So Kim, this would be a good time if you have any questions before we go into the next segment.
Good point.
Do you know who did the statue? Who the artist was?
Yes, I do. Claude Lamphere.
Thank you.
And it's about 50 feet tall, and it's just magnificent. And at night it is
beautiful.
lighted.
I don't have anything else in the chat, so if anyone else wants to unmute and make a comment or question right now, go ahead.
What an attentive class,
Yeah.
Tony.
I know, a little different than 20-year-olds, right?
Well, I was going to say just like the college kids. Boy, they're awake and alert, you
Yeah.
people. This is wonderful.
All right,
All right.
let's see, let me go to this.
Great. So as Susan was saying, one of the things, and I know Dave shares this feeling as well, the Res is a really amazing place, but it's a place where poverty and lots of other difficulties are really apparent. But with that, you also see this amazing resilience. And so we wanted to talk about both of those things. So if we can go to the next slide, Kim. We're going to start just by talking about some of the challenges or adversities that the Lakota people face in Rosebud, and the Rosebud Reservation in particular. You can go to the next one, Kim. Great. So here's one of my caveats. Trying to find data or statistics that actually coincide is challenging when it comes to reservation life. And part of that, as recognized by, one of the sources that I've listed at the bottom here, there were folks from the Rosebud Reservation and the university that's nearby who did research. And so they had an in to the communities, and the numbers just do not jive. So for example, when we talk about living in poverty, it says 43.4% of the people live in poverty. Now that's according to the US labor statistics. But I can tell you just from being there, it's a much higher number. And so you can go to one government agency and you get one number, and you go to another agency and you get a completely different number, sometimes with differences of 70 or something like that. So we relied heavily for the information that we're giving you on the work that was done just a few years ago by a team of folks, including people who live on the reservation, where they were really trying to get at some of these statistics and then trying to figure out how to move ahead so that they're coordinated better. So again, poverty is very high on the reservation. And as we get into some of the other things, you'll see why. But with poverty goes lower lifespans. And it's really quite remarkable, actually. The Rosebud Reservation average life age is 56 years. In South Dakota itself, it's 80. So you can see a huge discrepancy in lifespan. Unemployment, here's another one where as we were looking some of these things up at various governmental sites and the board, the BIE, all of those sites, we came up with amazingly different numbers. Unemployment is very high on the reservation. I would lean towards this 85% and possibly even higher than that. There's simply, and I'll talk about the employment in just a moment, but there simply are not opportunities to get employment on the reservation. So unemployment is astronomically high. Although some stats told me that it was only 9%, I was like, no, that's clearly inaccurate. High school dropout rates, it's still pretty high. 26 to 30% of students drop out before graduating. When we were there, so a little more than 2 years ago, they were really excited because they had one of their highest ever graduation rates that particular year. Things have been a little stranger because of the pandemic, and on the res, if you have to go to something like this, like Zoom, about 60% of people on the reservation have access to computers, that sort of thing, but only about 40% have access to broadband. So if you're a student and you're trying to do a Zoom class and you're not in that 40%, that's going to be a significant problem. The Rosebud Reservation itself, though, holds a lot of attraction to the people who are part of the Lakota Nation. It has one of the highest enrollments of people, or highest numbers of people who are actually enrolled in the nation who actually live on the reservation. So as you can see here, 34,150 enrolled tribal members. 85% of them live on the reservation, and the largest group is in Todd County, which has 9,620, and that's where we are. And then people are spread, as Susan mentioned earlier. There can be a community of 10 people. It's very, very rural, miles and miles and miles of rural land.
One thing on employment.
Yeah.
Unemployment. It's difficult to get a business started because the people don't have the credit rating to get a business started. That's part of the problem. Plus culturally, as I said in Parmalee, or I didn't say, I forgot to say it, you might go to work at 10 in the morning, or you might go to work at 3 or 5. So the 9 to 5 mentality is not evident there. And that's another reason that it's been difficult to even, there was a hog farm that came and someone supplied the money, but it was hard to keep it going simply because of different cultural ideas about things and being unable to either side adapt. So it really works against this.
Yeah.
Unemployment is just rampant.
If you can go, Kim, to the next slide. This will give you an idea. So from this same study, and they literally, there's a notation at the bottom, but they literally had one of the folks who lives on the reservation, Simone Bordeaux, because she had ins, she was able to get into some of these organizations, and literally they almost did like head counts to find out how many people were employed. So these are the major employers within the Rosebud tribe. And you can see that if you were to, or let me back up, excuse me. As you look at some of these, it's like, oh, well, Todd County School District has 490 employees. They do have 490 employees. A significant number of them are not natives. Many of the teachers, the majority of teachers are not natives or native speakers. And that's true in virtually all of these different things that are listed here. There are lots of folks who work in these places who are not natives. So that leaves even fewer jobs for natives. If you were to add all of these numbers up, you'd see that there's 2,065 jobs available for a tribe that has approximately 25,000 people living on it. So hence unemployment really difficult. The other thing, when you drive onto the reservation, there are things that you will see, like you'll see these beautiful farms or ranches, and you'll think, well, wow, that's, great source for income, work, etc. Almost none of those are actually owned by natives. The land itself is owned, but they signed leases that go for bazillions of years, and the money really doesn't come back into the community at all. In Mission, where we are, if you were walking around in what we would, I guess, call the downtown area, there are only a few businesses, a gas station, a couple of grocery stores, and none of them are native owned. They are all owned by people outside of that community. So they may employ natives, but you can see where this becomes a really significant problem. Lots of people, just not lots of opportunities for jobs anywhere. Would you want to add anything to that, Susan?
No.
Okay.
It's good.
All right, we can go to the next slide.
Okay, as you look at these community and school challenges, we have all of these things in Holland, Michigan. But the difference on the res is this is the norm. There is not one family that hasn't experienced 1, 2, or more of these things. And the students talk about these things so freely with the Hope students. They'll come home at night and say, I can't believe what this 3rd grader told me. Suicide is such a big thing. And when we were there the last couple years, it really was evident. In fact, for graduation, a student had committed suicide and they did not say anything about it at the graduation because they were afraid then somebody else would do that. Alcohol and drugs. When we first went, there was a 5th grader in alcohol rehab. And when we first went, the students were huffing Lysol and all different things, simply, I think, as an escape. And there was not a lot of purpose. Then teen pregnancy became a big issue. And the home ec teacher, remember, students had to carry around dolls that cried to try to make students understand the responsibility and the challenge when you have a child. At one time, cutting was kind of the new thing that was going on. Opioid addiction in recent years. And then poor health services, that all of these things need to be attended to, but the health services aren't that plentiful. And also, sad to say, many children are not in the custody of their parents, but they are with their grandparents or they are with their great grandparents. And so also in recent years, the males haven't been as evident in homes. And so it's really a very sad, heart-wrenching student situation out there. And again, we know these things happen everywhere, but this is the norm on the res.
If I can add something too about the poor health services, the Bureau of Indian Affairs runs a, I guess we'd call it a clinic on right near Mission, but they can only really deal. It's sort of like going to an urgent care. They're not really equipped to deal with any life-threatening emergencies and that sort of thing. So it's very common to see people flown out of the community and brought to another hospital, that sort of thing. But first you have to get to the clinic. And the clinic also for a while was closed because of some violations of, I don't know, some health standards or something, I'm not really sure. So at that point, people had to drive miles and miles, but that's still true for a lot of people on the reservation.
Mm-hmm.
The health services just are not up to speed where they need to be.
And I'll just add, there was a new hospital built in Rosebud. This is probably 25 years ago. And it was in a circle because a circle is an important part of the thinking and culture of the Lakota Sioux. And every year we toured the hospital, it was always said, we're trying to get a physical therapist to come here.
Mm-hmm.
And for 10 years, they couldn't. And the challenge of getting people to go to the res is difficult, and it's understandable why it's difficult, but that doesn't help the situation either. So next,
right.
You ready?
Yep, we're ready for the next one. So one of the issues of adversity that many tribal nations have faced is boarding schools. And this has been much in the news recently, both in Canada, Michigan, and other parts of the country. But the Carlisle Indian Industrial Boarding School is, it's located in Pennsylvania, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. But this is the school that children from the Rosebud and the Pine Ridge and a couple of other reservations, they were recruited, and recruited is a euphemism. In many cases, the parents did not have a choice. Children were simply removed from homes and brought to these boarding schools. And this particular one was started in 1879 by a man named Richard Pratt. And Richard Pratt was a military person. And if you look at this picture, you can see that influence pretty easily. The children were, all of their clothing was removed, and they were placed in very uncomfortable uniforms. Even things that I wouldn't have even thought about, having to wear hard shoes, when these children had never worn them their whole lives. And they didn't, all of their clothing, moccasins, any of those things, those were taken away from them. And the idea of these boarding schools, and this was attributed to Pratt at one point, he made the comment, and again, made the comment is, this has been told to us, so we don't see it in writing in some places. But his idea was sort of to kill the Indian and save the man. The idea was to essentially get all of the Indian out of these children and have them essentially be assimilated into the majority white culture at the time. Very difficult experience for I would venture the vast majority of students who went to these schools. So there were things like having to wear the uniforms, for example, everything very military style, marching in lines, things that they were simply unaccustomed to doing. You'll notice that all of their hair is cut. In Lakota life, hair is a very spiritual thing. And you only cut off hair when you're in mourning, when someone in your family has died. And to the point where even in talking with Richard, one of our colleagues there, you don't go up and touch someone's hair on the reservation, because hair is just considered to be this very sacred thing. So it wasn't at the boarding schools, they were all just cut off. During the summer, many of these students did not go home to their tribes. Instead, they were literally farmed out to white farms and other kinds of businesses where they were paid almost nothing. So some of these children did not see their own families for really extended periods of time. They also were not allowed to use their language, their tribal language. They had to speak in English, and they would be punished if they did that. I mean, part of the reason for bringing them to Pennsylvania was to get them away from all tribal influences. These places also were just hotbeds for disease. There simply was not adequate, they were not designed in a way, you know, where when kids were in boarding sleeping rooms where there were 40 or 50 kids, one kid gets the flu, well, it's going to ravage the entire boarding school. Many of the boarding schools, as we've been reading in the news, many children died, were not returned to their tribal lands. And that's true for Rosebud as well. Rosebud has been involved in a several-year litigation to get their kids back so that they can bury them on tribal land. And if I remember right, we've had this sort of 2-year difficult to get information, but it looked like they were going to get more of their children's remains back, and they were happy about that. Yeah.
Okay, if I could just add, it really sounds ugly. And if we can step back, it doesn't make it any nicer, but the reasoning behind this assimilation was to have a better life, to become involved in American society, to have a job, to have a home. And assimilation, as when Irish people came over, Russian people came over and assimilated into the society. So the government thought, we'll take the children and begin with this generation and assimilate them. And this was the way that we would do it. And the government asked the churches if they would become a part of this and help with this. And that's how the church got involved. And we know that the Indian people didn't want to be assimilated, and it just didn't work. When Irish people came, it was because they wanted to do this. And that was a big difference with Indian people. They just did not assimilate. But at the boarding schools, if you were half-blood, you assimilated easier because these people had white and Indian blood. And they were treated a little bit better than the traditional Indians who were full bloods. So even within the boarding school, there was some discrepancies there. But the intention, and maybe that is just my point of view, I like to think the intention was good. We want you to have a good life, but it certainly did not turn out. And now we have what we have up here, historical trauma.
I think, and this is one of those areas too, as I mentioned at the beginning, Susan and I don't look at all of these things the same. This happens to be one of the areas that she and I have talked about a lot, and we don't have the exact same view, and that's good because that helps us to sort of keep thinking about this. My sort of take on the boarding schools is that the goal was to assimilate them into white culture, but actually they're the indigenous people. And in my mind, if anyone needed to assimilate, it was the other way around. And so when Europeans came here, they came to a very different continent, right? With lots of people, white people, Europeans already here, where the natives they were pushed from their life, from their lands. And then the boarding schools really became, in many ways, a way to, the children were literally kidnapped in some cases. They were just simply taken from their parents. So I think that in the minds of the people like Pratt who started this school, I think that, I hope, I don't know, it's hard to know, but I hope, as Susan does, that his intention in his own mind was a good intention. But as we know and are continuing to learn more about, there are lots and lots of issues around this whole boarding school initiative.
The concept.
Yeah.
And what's so good is it does bring discussion and dialogue and respecting each person's point of view, which in this day and age is just so important. But if I could just add, then you can have the last word, that Rose Bordeaux and her husband had 7 children. And they all named them with the first letter beginning with an R, except one. All of those children went to school, and they went to St. Francis Indian boarding school. And they all went on and got degrees, most of them in education. And so it's almost like this is a happy ending, but it only happened for this, that I know of, this Bordeaux family and some others. But again, they were not full-blooded Indian people. They were half French and half Indian. So I think there are, and right now St. Joseph's Indian School in South Dakota is doing a good job of helping children learn and grow. So there are some boarding schools, I think, that are serving a good purpose. I just had to throw that in, but now you can have a comeback.
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
We can go to the next one, Kim.
Okay, so while we're on boarding schools, the woman on the left, as you're looking at the picture, is Lydia Whirlwind Soldier. She is a Rosebud resident who at 4 years old was taken from her family and taken to St. Francis Indian School. And she was there, she's a full blood, she was there through 8th grade. And she vowed she would never speak English or write English after she got out. But she did end up, and it was therapeutic, she said, she's an author and a poet, to write about her experiences. And if you want to read a book on personal boarding school experiences, Shaping Survival, there are essays from 4 women there, and Lydia's story is in there. And she became an educator. She worked in the Todd County Schools. She tried to integrate the Lakota into the curriculum. And she's going to be speaking at the Big Read, which is coming up. I'm so excited. On the far right is her daughter, Cheryl, who's been a teacher and administrator and is now working at the college on Rosebud. And then Lydia's granddaughter is in the middle with her dancing outfit. She's a remarkable woman, and she does not express any resentment towards us. At one time, I said to Lydia, and Dave Zwart probably remembers this, she spoke to our group, and I said, Lydia, did I remind you of that blue-eyed nun when we first came? Because people didn't greet us wholeheartedly. And then she waited what seemed like 10 minutes, so it was probably 20 seconds, and said, of course not. I don't know whether she really meant that or not. But anyway, it takes a while to cultivate these relationships. So this is a great book to read. And if you're around for the Big Read, listening to her will be excellent.
Mhm.
Next one, and I think, okay. So besides writing Shaping Survival, she also wrote a book called Memory Songs. And at the time she said to me, there's no word for poems in Lakota. These are songs. And at the Big Read, she's going to first tell a story and then read the poem that she wrote about it. It is so powerful. It is very powerful. That is, if we can get all the technology to work, she will be here. We've been trying to do that because she's way out in one of those little communities. Now, I'll hold on the story.
Okay,
You want, unless, what do you think time-wise?
I think we should probably,
Okay.
Fine.
Mhm. Okay, next one. Okay, another significant thing in the history of the Lakota is the Battle of Wounded Knee, or more commonly known as the Wounded Knee Massacre. So if you look on the left-hand side and you think about the Lakota culture and how they were living prior to the colonization of the West. And they had lost land. They were losing their culture through assimilation or through the boarding schools. Their buffalo had been slaughtered, and they had been moved to reservations. And this is all in the 1800s. In 1875, they had the big Indian victory at Greasy Grass in Montana, where the Indians were the victors. Well, 15 years later, they had the massacre, where what happened was Bigfoot was moving his tribe to Pine Ridge for safety. And there was a lot of turmoil at that time because of the ghost dance. And a Paiute shaman by the name of Wovoka had a vision. And in that vision, he saw his ancestors return to the country, and there was a return of the buffalo and a return to the original way of life. And this would come about if the Indian people did what was called the ghost dance, which was a repetitive dance in a circle, and it went on for a long period of time. And Wovoka said, this is what's going to change our situation. This will give us hope. It's even been sometimes compared to the coming of Christ. So they were doing these ghost dances around the country. And it was unnerving to the white people, to the military, and they couldn't seem to stop it. So Bigfoot and his tribe were going down to Pine Ridge for some safety. Well, then the cavalry came and said, you have to be detained here at Wounded Knee Creek. And so they put up camp there. And again, there are many different versions of how this started, whether it was a person with a hearing impairment that didn't understand and wouldn't give up his rifle or whatever. But anyway, there was gunfire and the soldiers fired on the Indians and about 150 were killed. And maybe some of you have seen this picture on the right of Bigfoot frozen in the snow. So basically, what Wounded Knee did was to end any of the Indian wars and fighting with the cavalry. That was done. We're going to have to go to the reservations and live a different kind of life. So this is a significant historical event, which you probably have all read about. So
To the next
that's it.
slide,
Yeah.
because these are a couple pictures of it.
Okay, this is the Wounded Knee, and maybe some of you have been there, the Wounded Knee Cemetery. And within the gated area are the remains of all of the people who died there. And it's really a very sacred place.
Mhm.
And then the next slide will show it's a big cemetery. If you want to go to the next one, Kim. Okay, and is in the middle of nowhere, and people are buried around that sacred site. And in this particular picture, you'll notice there's a mound over the grave. And that is because if people had money, they could dig the land and put the coffin down in the ground. But the poor people simply had to just build a little mound and have the person buried there. And you'll notice there are flowers and different things there. And one of the first times we were there, I think it was Dave that said to someone who was there, well, what is this orange peel? What is this fruit doing here? Why is this here? And the person said, well, that's for the spirits. Now tell me why your flowers are on the graves. So it's just a different way. And Dave or Tony will talk about the little flags and Indian pouches that are around here, but this is a big sacred cemetery and very important. It's just outside the town of Pine Ridge. Okay.
Okay, Kim.
Okay, and I put this in. I'll just read these. Bear with me. But it's a blog. What was the blog?
TripAdvisor.
TripAdvisor. And I was looking at some of the comments in there, and here's one that said it was about visiting the Wounded Knee Cemetery. Did not enjoy this place at all. I would say don't bother, but everyone needs to form their own opinion. Found the cemetery neglected and certainly not inspiring. Some hawker dude was selling an eagle claw necklace for $20. Yeah, right. Just a dumpy area that should be better. Go there if you dare. When I first read this, I thought, When Dave and I first went there, I didn't say anything quite like that, but I was so surprised at all the trash that was on the ground and different things. Nothing was kept up like in Holland, Michigan. But culturally, that is the culture of the people on the Rosebud. And it's not important how your house looks, or if you have something you no longer need, you just leave it because wherever you are, because somebody else might use it and pick it up, to the extent that an old car could be the house for a dog. So anyway, I felt a little guilty when I read this because I know I was there at one point. But going to the next slide is where I am now. This is a family that went there and wrote, "This is sacred ground." My son and I stopped on July 1st, 2014. We were instantly consumed by the sorrow of what had happened here. Like another TripAdvisor mentioned, please show your ultimate respect for these sacred grounds and never judge whether it is tidy enough or presentable. And I think going out there, probably Dave, Tony, and myself all at first had to tell ourselves we can't judge. We are in another culture and we need to assimilate ourselves and learn, not judge. And that's a hard thing to do.
Mhm. Kim, this would be a good time if there's any questions before we move into our next bit.
Look, oh, sure enough, we have some. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, start at the beginning. How far would people need to travel to get jobs other than the ones shown?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a specific answer, other than to say, again, all of South Dakota is very rural, and the reservations are quite large and even more rural. So I would venture to guess that if you were trying to get a job in one of the outside communities, you're probably looking at 100 miles or two.
Or 3 hours to a big city
Yeah.
like Rapid or Sioux Falls.
Yeah,
And then sometimes not being accepted in those
Mhm.
communities is a block to employment.
right.
But you'd go a distance
Yeah.
to get into a town that's still small by our standards
Yeah.
to get a job. Mhm.
I did ask somebody on the res, so why do people come back? Why do you come back? Because certainly there are students from the high school who go on to colleges and universities, get degrees, and there are a lot of Native tribes that have lots of their members living in other cities and other places. So my question was, so why come back? There's not a job for you here. And so you have a skill set, but it can't be used in that way here. And the answer I got was basically that this is my community. These are the people who know me, who understand me, and I don't have to constantly explain myself and my Native tradition and all of those kinds of things. And so there's a huge pull, and that community piece is really, really important.
Mhm. Sometimes too, when people though come back to the res, they find they aren't accepted like they were before because you left and came back, and now are you going to tell us what to do? It's a complex.
It is.
It's complicated. Yeah.
Then another question was, what was the program that Hope students were involved with? Like, what did they do?
Oh, we're going to talk about that in just a moment. If we can hold
Okay.
on one, that'd be
Great.
great.
And then a couple comments, other cultures didn't have their children taken away. Greed and racism have fueled many atrocities in our history, and we should have been the ones to assimilate to their ways. So
Yeah.
a couple, those are just some comments. And then Helen was asking, when did these schools stop being used? And related to that question is another one that is asking that this person's impression was that many of the schools were run by missionaries trying to convert students to Christianity,
Mhm.
and whether or not that's true or part of it.
Yeah, on Rosebud, there is still a boarding facility because there are some students who are not, come from unsafe home environments, and there are some students who live so far away from a school setting that being in a boarding location allows them access to the school. This boarding facility, however, is it's not the school, it's just a boarding facility, and it's run by natives, and children go there. I mean, everything is vetted properly. The people who run, almost all the people who run the facility are natives, and the students do go home on weekends to be with their family. When did some of these schools end? I think the Carlisle school only ran for about 50 years and then it closed down. And that seems to be about the time frame for a lot of these schools. And a number of them were run by religious groups, Catholic schools in particular. So we have the St. Francis Indian boarding school really close by. And that's true around the country. Sadly, in my mind, that didn't make them better places. Even when we're looking at, some of these boarding schools, the goal was, again, to make the Indian or native children assimilate into a culture and belief sets that were simply not part of their experience. And so, these were just very difficult places. I can't even wrap my head around if somebody tried to come and take my children when they were young and say, sorry, you don't have the right set of values or whatever. And so we're going to take your children and teach them the right things. So I don't know of any active ones right now, but I'm sure.
Yeah, in South Dakota, there are 3. The St. Francis, the Flandreau, and then what's the third one? St. Francis. Okay, I can't remember. St. Joseph's. But in a way, so when they closed Carlisle, that model didn't work. It didn't work, and that was done. But I think, and this is my own opinion, I think some of the schools that are in operation now are addressing some of the traumas that children or parents had, and they are now a safe place and a good place for the children to be for whatever reason. In Chamberlain, St. Joseph's goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. So from kindergarten to middle school, they're in St. Joseph's school, and then or kindergarten through 8th grade, and then 9 through 12, they go into the high school. So there are some versions of these left. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go on and then we'll come back and talk about we'll talk in just a moment about the actual program the students are on. But we wanted to so we've been talking about the adversity that we've seen, but we also wanted to talk about demonstrations of resilience that we've seen. And clearly, these are just some of them, some things that have jumped out for us. So if we can switch to the next slide.
I had put a comment to Dor about wondering where the name Rosebud came from. I came in late for the beginning, so perhaps that was addressed at that time.
That wasn't. Rosebud was named because of all the flowers in the spring that look like a rosebud. The Indian name for that they're the people of the Sichangu, and that means burned thigh. And years ago, there was a big fire and people ran across the prairie and their thighs were burned. So burned thigh, Sichangu is the official. And then from that, Rosebud, because of the flowers on the prairie.
Thank you.
So,
We'll have to speed it up.
okay, I'll go fast. Okay, here are the Lakota virtues that the tribe follows. And I just put these: bravery, fortitude, wisdom, and generosity, because these represent on the circle, the four, on the medicine wheel, the four directions. And that's all I'll say about that
Okay.
for time.
We can go to the next slide. One of the things that we've been talking about mentioning is this sense of community. And I think that one place where you really see community is at the powwows. And we're really fortunate because we get invited to these powwows. And I know I embarrass Susan when I say this, but it's because of Susan. Susan started this program. Susan is literally a member of this community. And so you can't even go 2 blocks or 2 steps down a sidewalk without somebody yelling, Susan, Susan, and there's another half an hour conversation. But it's a wonderful thing because we've, I think, been given opportunities to learn about the community and to be in the community that might not have occurred otherwise. So the powwows in particular are something that really impressed me. The community members come. There are drum groups. Usually, this picture doesn't, I think, show any of the drum groups, but there are usually 4 or 5 drum groups set up around. There's usually a procession that comes in, often led by people who served in the military, the US military, which is a very interesting thing for me. I'm still trying to puzzle out. But, and then whoever is being honored. So sometimes it's graduates. And as Susan mentioned to you, one of the things I love about this sense of community is, and especially given the fact that in terms of physical wealth, people on this reservation, that is simply doesn't exist, right? Yet what they do have, they're incredibly willing to share. So in the ceremony itself, Susan mentioned this earlier, at the graduation when the high school graduates come down with their families, and then they name a teacher or 2 and why those teachers have had an impact upon them. And they'll invite the teacher to come down, they give them some kind of a gift. And then it's very common for them to go up into the stands and just start passing out gifts to people. And the gifts are tokens. They're wonderful little things. They can be a washcloth, or it could be, a pop saver or things like that. They don't have to be extravagant things. The other thing that happens in the powwow is, so the student and the families line up, and then all of us are invited to go and to congratulate them. So you go and you kind of do the snake thing, and then it turns into the dance. And the dance then becomes a big circle. And we have always all been invited to participate. In fact, they specifically will say, we would like the Hope College students to participate. And it's an amazing experience. I absolutely loved it. It just feels like you just get this real sense of community and how important it is to be together and to appreciate each other. And I felt that every single time I've gone. They're amazing opportunities. I'd been to powwows before, but I watched them. I'd never actually been invited to participate in a powwow before. We can go to the next one, Kim. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other things that I think is a real strength, what helps the Lakota folks stay resilient is the sense of spirituality that permeates the res. And it's an interesting place because the presence of Christianity is there. There's a Catholic church, there's an Episcopalian church. In the times that I attended, I think our group probably was bigger than the group of parishioners that happened to be there. But there is a very active, especially the Episcopalian church in mission is very active, and they are the people who help us find accommodations for where we stay and that sort of thing. But I wanted to show you this picture because while Christianity is present, there is also sort of a side by side for some people, and for some people they lean more in one direction than the other. But I hadn't known this word before, animism. I knew the word, I'd seen it, I'd never heard it pronounced. But animism really is what permeates this reservation, because when you think about animism, it's the idea that animals, objects, places, creatures, all of those things have a distinct spiritual essence. And so how you treat a tree makes a difference. How you treat animals. And there are these wonderful, wonderful stories that go with all of these things that are wonderful. And then you'll see, like in this picture, you'll see these little prayer, there's a name for
Pouches,
them.
tobacco
They
pouches.
have tobacco in them, and you'll see them in a lot of places. They represent, again, the 4 directions, east, west, south, and north, which also, by the way, during the powwows, in the powwows, they have you stand up and everyone faces east and north and south and west. The entire group does that. So those are very important markers within the community. But you see a lot of this. And if you can go to the next slide for me, Kim. This is our group.
Okay, this is, yes, our last group that went. And how did this program start and how do students get accepted? Well, Hope College has May terms and June terms where 4 weeks you can immerse yourself in a study of something or travel. So we set up this May term on Rosebud Indian Reservation. And when I talked with the superintendent about having some Hope students come out to work in the schools, the first thing he said to me was, "Are you coming out here to save the Indians?" And I kind of looked at him and I said, "No." And he said, "Well, what are you coming out here for?" And I said, "Well, we want to immerse ourselves in another culture and we want to try the skills of our chosen profession, nursing, education, or social work." So I said, "Okay, you can come." So Dave and I would take the first 16 people who signed up. And our philosophy at that point was maybe the person who it might appear through recommendations and whatever wouldn't be best suited to be out there, that person might benefit the most. How could we judge who should go and who shouldn't? Because this was an easy way to do it, the first 16 people that came. And they could get credit, college credit, 4 hours for spending 3 weeks, 24 hours a day in this setting. They could get credit for a culture diversity class. They could get credit for a cultural heritage. They could get credit for senior SEM. And for a while, they could get credit for religion. So they could get this experience, but they could also then get credit towards their college degree. So that's, yeah, here, the next slide. Oh yeah, we gotta keep moving. So what did we do? We jumped into 2 college vans and we drove to South Dakota. And on the right is our lovely little, it was an old boarding school and Tony is sitting on a car seat cushion right there. So we kind of like to live the way it is out there. So we don't stay in any casino hotel.
I described the place you can see there. It's also the offices for Habitat of Humanity for Humanity. I described the housing in there as sort of camping indoors, because this is really, there's no attempt at luxury in any way inside, but it works for us. It works really well.
Okay, the next one. Okay, a little history of the May term, and I just want to kind of thank Dave, who's out there in the audience. For 15 years, he went with me. And after our first year, where we weren't really accepted wholeheartedly, we were driving back, and somewhere at a rest area in Iowa, he gets out of the van. He says to me, "I'm never going back there again." And I said, "Okay." Well, we went back, and then in the fall, it was about October, he said, "Shouldn't we start recruiting for the res?" And I said, "Yes." So he is just a wonderful person. And now I have Tony, who's just an excellent partner to have out there. Over those 29 years, you can see we've probably served over 400 students who have gone out there. We have had student teachers. The requirement was you had to go on the May term if you wanted to student teach, so you know what you were getting into. And we've had about 5 student teachers out there, and we've had at least 9 people who have accepted positions. 2 of them worked there for 3 years. Okay, next slide. Okay, and I remember when Dave, he had worked at Northwestern College, he said, "Here are some good program goals. We've got to cultivate these." So we had this nice little list of goals, but basically what we've had for the last 29 years are to immerse yourself in another culture, and then to try your skills in your chosen profession. So that's the overarching goals. Okay.
We can go to the next one, Kim. So a little information about the school district that we work with, the Todd County School District. It's a fairly large area, 1,400 square miles. There are 9 elementary schools spread out all over, 1 middle school and 1 high school, which are right next to each other in Mission. The number of students, and again, these numbers are all approximate. We literally, they're on their website for the district. None of these things are listed. So we went to each of the schools and tabulated from things like that. So there's approximately 2,777 students and 197 teachers. Most of the classes have a pretty low ratio of teacher to student. In many classes, it's like 15 to 1. Somebody was asking about, like traveling and that sort of thing. You can see the buses alone, just to get kids to the schools they need to go to, it's about 3,600 miles each day. Hence the reason also for some students just living in the boarding facilities, because it's a much easier sort of day-to-day kind of commute. Attendance is a real problem in Todd County schools. On any given day, 25 to 30% of students are absent, and they can be absent for any number of reasons. They have to watch some of the other kids in the family, illnesses. There's, a whole range of reasons, but that's something they've really been trying to work on. Also, again, sort of how the school reflects the community. Virtually every student in Todd County schools is eligible for a free and hot lunch. Despite their very best efforts, their testing scores on standardized tests in South Dakota are really, really poor. In virtually every category in the elementary, middle school, and then in the high school tests, all state testing results came in the bottom 50th percent across all schools around the state. And they were in the way bottom of that 50th. So there's 631 schools, as I've indicated here in South Dakota. The schools that I've listed at the top here, the 9 elementary, the middle school, and the high school, they were typically ranked like 621, 630. They are the bottom schools when it comes to standardized testing in South Dakota. So, so the schools have a lot of work to do. We can move on.
Okay, this comes from the Todd County website, and you can see at the top the values that we talked about earlier: wisdom, generosity, courage, and fortitude, the vision of the schools, and then in their mission, working with the community and the tribe and any other educational facilities to prepare students to succeed. And if you look at the word spirituality, which was in this mission statement years ago, there was an uproar about including spirituality in this mission statement, but it did not reference religion. Spirituality is a way of life. And so this was included in the mission statement. Okay.
So, let me go to the next slide.
Oh, and this is a picture of one of our Hope students with her classroom. The students go Monday through Friday, work in the schools. They come home at night, and we have elders speak to the group, or we have discussion groups and things like that. So our students are fully immersed in the culture and in their profession. Okay.
You can go to the next one. One of the other things that our students do when they're there is learning from tribal elders. This is Leland Little Dog. He's not only an elder, he's one of the historians for the community. And the link that we have with him is just amazing. He's able to bring us places that we would never, ever find on the reservation, and explain the history and the people. He just has a wealth of experience. He can tell the creation stories in a way that's incredible. I think that's what he's doing right here, actually,
Yes.
In a way that's really engaging to the students. And then he even talks to them about, I know that many of you are from a Christian background, and if you really look at these stories, there's a lot of similarities in our stories from different faith communities. So he's just a gem. We're so lucky.
We are, and if I can just tell one little thing, I referenced earlier when Dave and I went out, we didn't feel welcome. We didn't really know if we should go back. It took about 3 years. When Leland said to me, Hope students are different. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they want to learn from us. And I really felt we were totally accepted because we were listening and doing and learning. Yeah, he's a great guy.
When I think about Leland, too, just a quick side story. When you talk about resilience, so a couple of years ago when we were out there, he was supposed to come and talk with us, and we got word that he had been flown out because his appendix had burst or something. And so we're like, okay, well, maybe we can schedule for the last week we're here. In a couple of weeks, maybe he'll be okay. I think he came 2 days later. Never even know that he had his appendix out or been in the hospital or anything. But that's just sort of the kind of person he is. So
I just want to share one thing that Leland said that made such good sense. He said, you hear lots of different stories about different topics. He said, look at it this way. 2 and 3 are 5, 4 and 1 are 5, 5 and 0 are 5. There are different ways to get to the same thing. And that really hit me as I don't have to have the same thing. There are different ways to get to whatever. Okay.
All right. So next, we just wanted to show you just really quickly some of the places that the students also go and learn about.
Well, the first weekend we're on the res touring, then the second weekend we go into the Badlands. And then we take the students to see Crazy Horse.
Which is the next
Monument.
slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the next slide is Crazy Horse. It's not finished yet, and they've been working on it 40 some years, but hopefully it will be done. And there are no government funds that have been used for this statue. And this is Crazy Horse pointing in the direction to the lands where his people lie.
All right.
So it's beautiful and it's worth seeing.
Mhm.
And they're going to have a hospital there and they have a beautiful museum there. Oh, in the background, you can see his head. Well, don't have a pointer, but if you look under his armpit, you can see his head in the stone. Okay, the next one. Okay, and then we take the students to Mount Rushmore and they get to see that. And then I think the last slide is the monument to Santa Gleshka, who was the leader of Rosebud, where we go. And then what's next? I think,
Just one more slide for questions.
once in a while, Tony and I can sit and have a cup of coffee and talk.
Yeah.
So anyway, questions or comments or experiences from you?
Let's see. How many US treaties have been broken?
Oh, most. I
All?
mean, yeah,
All of them.
I don't know of any that haven't been, frankly, that
Mhm.
maybe there are some, but yeah. I mean, the rosebud in this whole nation used to stretch all across the middle of the country, and they just got shoved and shoved and shoved.
Mhm.
And that's the story that every tribal nation I've read about, it's the same story, and just treaty after treaty being sort of a suggestion as opposed to an actual legal document that was upheld.
Mhm.
The other one is someone wondering if the standard test, if you think they reflect anything of Native culture.
Yeah, the standardized tests. You know, that's a great question. And that's something that I would love to look at this year when we're out there. When the years that we had been out there before, we just hadn't, I don't know, for whatever reasons, we hadn't paid a lot of attention to the testing stuff that was going on or how the students were doing. So when we found this data, then all of a sudden I was like, whoa. And so it's on my list. Hopefully we get to go this May, and it's on my list to say, okay, so talk with us about the standardized testing. And because we know that standardized testing for a lot of non-majority groups are problematic. They don't, cultural references or all kinds of things make those tests difficult. And I've got to wonder, because the schools that we go into, they're incredible schools. I mean, incredible teachers doing, and Susan and I spent our whole lives going in, either being classroom teachers or going into classrooms. They're great teachers. And so the fact that the students score so poorly, there's a disconnect there for me that I want to know more about. So
Part of the problem is the attendance.
Yeah.
Because they either
Mhm.
don't get up or they're staying home to take care of someone or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's a contributing factor,
Sure.
but the scores are low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last question I have in the chat is what, given your experiences, should be done?
Well, that's a really, wow. I could think about that question for a really long time. But I think what if I was going to say what should be done is that we have to allow more agency for people on who are part of these nations. They simply, have been lied to, frankly, cheated. There's just so many awful things that have happened over time. And so to give you an example, a more practical example, I know in the Big Read, the children's book and the Big Read book are both Native authors. And I'm really excited about that because we need to hear stories told from the people who own those stories. And to me, that sort of feeds into just this whole notion of we need to do a better job of listening and then acting upon those things. I think Deb, I can't remember her last name, Holland, the new, she's in the the administration with public lands. I can't remember the exact name of the group that she's in, but she's a native and she's the first one to ever hold this position. And I've heard her speak a lot about, okay, we need to really start thinking about how this happened and how we're going to try to make people's lives better. So I know that's a rambling answer, but man, that's a big question. That's a tough one.
And I'll just add that listening and learning and turning the decision-making over to the tribe. But over the years, I think the confidence is lost, and what is it we really want and how can we do that? So, and I know our time is up. This was so exciting just to be with all you people and to share our program. So thank you so much. And I hope that you can all tune in to hear Lydia Whirlwind Soldier read from her memory songs. That would be just wonderful.
Well,
We
yeah,
have a course on November 4th on the book for the Big Read. And then members have been sent all of the Big Read events. that
Great.
list.
so
So
yeah.
I have one last comment, which I think is important to share. Amy was saying that we still expect the Native people to conform to our society, and that she doubts there was anything like unemployment among them before the European influence.
Yeah.
Perhaps returning them to their cultural ways would give them better motivation for living.
Yeah.
Then
There-
the last question, this is a good one. Would Lakota Sioux, or has anyone from the res ever expressed an interest in coming to teach at Hope or even be a student at Hope?
Well, we were supposed to get a student a year ago, but she didn't come.
Okay.
We've had Lydia Whirlwind Soldier present at Hope. We've had Leland Little Dog and Lynn LaPointe present at Hope. So
Okay.
we've had a little interaction and we wish we could have more.
Mhm. Okay.
Oh, I
Thank you.
forgot, we had the volleyball team
Yeah.
from Rosebud, thanks to the generosity of what I call Santa Claus, who funded the trip, and the volleyball team from South Dakota came out and participated in Becky Schmidt's volleyball camp. And they did that for 2 years. and
Yeah, it was great.
Wonderful
Awesome.
Yeah.
for Hope students
It did,
and
yeah.
for the Rosebud students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a little comment, but we went to South Dakota, Rosebud, and just to kind of learn about them, and we came home with a star quilt.
It's hard not to.
So, quick comment. Susan and I talked about this. One thing that's hard to get students to come to Hope College is the culture is so different.
Oh, yeah.
When I was at Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa, we tried to recruit basically Black students out of the inner city of Chicago. And it's a whole different new world.
It's a lot
And
to
have them
ask.
come there. It's really tough to try to understand
Mhm.
from their culture to live in our culture and to try to understand the two.
Mhm.
Well
Mhm.
said, Dave. I
My
would
daughter,
extend an
Hi, Dave.
invitation. If any of you do road trips and you want to come out and stay with us a day or something, feel free. If you want to immerse yourself in another culture. Is that okay? I said that, Tony?
Oh, she's asking me because I do all the money stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll talk.
We've had the registrar from Hope and other people come
Yeah.
out. We tried to get our dean and he ended up being in a sleet storm in Colorado and only made it for 1 day. But if you're adventuresome, think about it and then talk to Tony.
yeah,
What was your
Well,
comment?
daughter,
Are there other
My-
questions?
daughter Amy went with you guys in 1996. I don't know if you can hear.
Oh, Jane Dahlman is saying that her
Amy?
daughter
Or-
Amy went with you in 1996.
Amy, what's her last
Yeah.
name?
Dolman.
Uvrard,
I can't remember what
Uvrard.
she was in, but that's been a couple years.
It sounds like
Yeah,
The
Yes.
people on Rosebud are more welcoming than those on Pine Ridge,
Well
based
said.
on the experiences I've heard about.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but I do think, and I mentioned this earlier, I think that what you have to, like, it takes a long time to build this trust and respect and all of that. And I'm giving that over to this one right here. She's the one who got this started. They trust Susan. And I've always said, we get the benefit of coming in on her coattails, because I really do believe that the people in the community believe that she will only bring people who are there to learn and to respect the culture. And so we get invited to these just incredible things. We get to go to their honors banquet at the boarding facility. There's stuff that wouldn't happen if you didn't. You have to have that connection, right?
He's way too kind, but thank you.
No.
But your point on Pine Ridge is true, because that was the site of the second Wounded Knee when in the 70s, and Indians were trying to get their rights recognized. And so it's just more of a militant, different outlook. And it could be because Crazy Horse was their leader. When the leader of the Rosebud, Sinta Gleshka, went to Washington, D.C., he came back and said, there's nothing we can do to overcome what's out there. So they pretty much kind of conformed a little more than the Pine Ridge people. Yeah, they're kind of a militant, and that's where the American Indian movement, AIM, was birthed out there in Pine Ridge. So yeah.
And we did have a whole group
Are they
that's
both Lakota?
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we did have a whole group that went there. Steve Hugerworth, who's in the religion department, he brought a group out. I don't know how many years Steve did that.
Maybe 10.
Yeah, probably about 10 years, but he just retired. And so that program is not continuing. So
Mhm.
Jim, that was the program where they're working on beds,
Right, bunk bed
Mhm.
ministry.
bunk beds.
yeah.
Mhm.
Bug Edmonds.
Yeah.
So are there any further questions?
Okay,
Well,
we'll get the test now, okay?
Yeah, you got to ask us questions now. We'll see how many of us. I hope it's multiple choice. That's all I got to say. But anyway, I just want to say a final thank you to you guys for this. It was really, really informative from my perspective. It breaks my heart. I asked that question about what can be done. I know it was a naive question, but maybe there's hope in my heart, maybe that something can or will happen to improve the lives of these people, but and
Well,
keep them to be, and let them hold on to their culture, obviously. So with that, I guess we'll say farewell.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, you guys. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
You
Bye.
too. Oh, that's a fun